And there it goes. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the XenoRob show. And try not the Let's Play thing again because my coworkers convinced me it would be a good idea. And given that it's October, I wanted to play a scary game, so we're playing Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, you may think this game doesn't look very scary, but if you were Nintendo in 1991, you'd be shitting your pants looking at this. Sonic the Hedgehog is an interesting game. It's a very important game. Not only did it kickstart one of the most prominent franchises of all time, not just in gaming, but across media, comics, cartoons, movies now, all sorts of fun stuff. But it also was groundbreaking in more ways than I think a lot of people give it credit for. Not even just the game itself, but more about the concept, how it was marketed, how the character was designed, Sega's planning. So I kind of want to talk about that a bit. So just for the sake of history, gaming was about to die in like 1983. There was a huge video game crash, a bunch of Pac-Man carts got buried. Long story short, the gaming industry was in a similar spot that we're in with streaming right now, where you had one big shot that kind of started the whole thing, Netflix and Atari respectively, and then a bunch of other people who saw how easy it was for this market to grow. We're not going to worry about the Chaos Emeralds for this run, because this is just, we'll show it eventually. That's not important. You had a bunch of basically high quantity of low quality products flooding stores, and that almost killed gaming as we know it. It was back to the arcades. Home console gaming was, almost no more. But then Nintendo came in. Nintendo had a lot of success in Japan with their family computer, the Famicom, and they wanted to bring it over here into the US. And so they disguised it as a toy robot with essentially an accessory that worked like a video game system. That's Rob the Robot's purpose, if you're ever curious about that. And it was a runaway success. Mario Bros, Legend of Zelda, Metroid, so many classic games. I'm going to rewind on this playthrough. That was fast forward, but I am going to rewind. Not because this is not a skill Let's Play. This is I'm here to show you a game and talk about its history sort of thing, and also just talk about whatever the heck I want to talk about. I'm not an expert at this game. I've beaten it several times, but I don't see any reason to beat it correctly, since this is really just a funny thing to look at while I talk. But yeah, Nintendo came in and had a monopoly on the gaming market, and in some ways that was good, but in some ways it was not good. Nintendo's kind of like Disney. I think the companies have way more in common than I think a lot of people give them credit for, where both are, very important. Both are pioneers of their genre, and they're sort of like medium, I guess, because, animation isn't a genre, but, Disney makes more than animation. And they are incredibly effective at harnessing the nostalgia for their properties. Like, Nintendo has sold more copies of Super Mario Bros. On ports than they ever did on the NES. Be it either through like Virtual Console or remakes or ports or just downloads of the NES Online app. However, both these companies kind of have a few fatal flaws, and that ultimately kind of holds them back from becoming the most powerful force in the world, which they very easily could become, but in some ways they are their own worst enemy, both Disney and Nintendo. And Nintendo doesn't really like change, doesn't like to really do much to push the medium forward, as much as it's more about focusing on creating quality games. And that's kind of where they were at this point. NES was doing well, and while computers were getting better, Nintendo wasn't really planning to make like a Super NES. That was made as a counter to Sega, who was just destroying them in marketing. Because the Sega Genesis, initially, the Sega's first console was the Master System. And that was kind of not a flop. They didn't tank the company, but it wasn't successful enough to really put a dent in the NES. Their mascot, Alex Kidd, wasn't lighting the world on fire. And it just wasn't the success Sega wanted, even though it was incredibly successful over in Brazil, and I don't believe it has been officially discontinued there. I think you can still go to, like, Brazil equivalent of Best Buy and buy a Sega Master System, which is pretty cool. A lot of that's due to the fact that I believe it's handled by it's handled by a third-party company out there, but that's besides the point. We're in a Marble Zone now, so I should probably speed the story along. Sega wanted a piece of Nintendo's gaming pie, so they made Sonic the Hedgehog, a character that was created from an internal design competition held within Sega. Created by Naoto Oshima, I believe is how it's pronounced, and with the game designed by Yuji Naka, who is, mostly well-known for Balan Wonderworld and that whole fiasco right now, unfortunately. The game was pretty much a runaway success and overthrew Nintendo's market share and basically made it the console's a two-person game. And Sonic was revolutionary in a lot of ways, not just because it was a fun game. Like the game itself, it's fast, but like it isn't really designed to take full advantage of its speed and its concept. We didn't really see that until Sonic 2. So this game as it is pretty much a good platformer with a few high-speed segments and not much else, which is unfortunate. But what it did change, it changed gaming history forever, and a big part of how it did that was through its marketing. Because Sega was incredibly aggressive and incredibly smart with their marketing, making Nintendo seem like a baby toy, and how Sega was better in almost every conceivable way, and for only the cool kids, preying on gamers' insecurities. But yeah, Sega's ads were amazing at this point. Genesis does what Nintendo don't, and it's a far cry from the advertising we see today. A lot of our current ads is almost, I'd say vapid is the best way to describe a lot of current advertising. It's usually just, it's really loud more than anything. It's just, and this is coming from someone who's very loud, so the fact that I'm saying it probably, that should mean a lot. It's just very loud. It's like a bunch of flashy pop music, flashy electronica, just showing you a 3D model of the new iPhone or MacBook or whatever. And it doesn't really make you feel compelled to buy it. It's just saying, hey, the new thingamabob's out, and giving you little else. And most of it's just carried by, like, the fandom and the hype. And while there's nothing wrong with that, it does make commercials less interesting, and I think sort of shortens the reach that these products can have. Because Sega was not able to take out Nintendo almost, and basically force Nintendo to create the Super Nintendo because of the Genesis. It was more of the marketing than anything, and the marketing worked. Sonic worked. Even though the game has been kind of subject to a lot of criticism over the years, this game did the job, and it got Sega their killer app. It got Sega their mascot. It got us one of the most iconic characters of gaming history. And it also gave us another incredibly iconic part of gaming history, the console wars, which is still being felt to this day. Like, even on, like, you go on Twitter, the Devil's app, I friggin' hate Twitter, says the person who spends like an hour a day on it. But anytime you like go on Twitter, you'll see people like when Microsoft's like, the new Xbox One X has an exclusive Microsoft Flight Simulator coming to that in Windows. You'll see grown adults in the replies being PlayStation is better, even though they probably don't even have a PlayStation 5. It's very silly to just go out of your way to dunk on another company, especially when it's something like games, which are so subjective. Oh, hey, cool. I forgot the secret was here. But even afterwards, because, like, the whole reason the PlayStation exists, Nintendo's biggest competitor, was Nintendo was actually working with Sony to develop a disc-based add-on for the Super Nintendo. Sony didn't like the contract, they split off, and Nintendo was trying to work with Philips. And that's where all the Philips CDI Nintendo stuff comes in from, if you're familiar with that. But yes, Nintendo was so scared of Sega that they ended up creating their biggest competitor, because PlayStation has been going toe-to-toe with Nintendo, and even though it seems like it's more Xbox versus PlayStation right now, Nintendo's still doing really well in sales, and while Nintendo does still have that reputation of almost being the baby system, that was started by Sega. That's because Nintendo, like, had a good balance of a lot of different types of games. They're, like, not, like, violent and gory because just, the times were different. And, like, there were still, Nintendo had a lot of things and not lawsuits, but, like, laws about their games so you couldn't have blood in it, so Mortal Kombat had to change it to sweat. And Sega had guidelines like that, too, but they were less strict, so you had the cheat code, and that was a big blow against Nintendo. Losing Mortal Kombat, even though it was, like, the worst way to play it, because you didn't have enough buttons. But yeah, PlayStation exists because Nintendo was trying to beat Sega. And Sega's the reason that console wars are a thing. Sega's the reason a lot of gaming marketing was really aggressive for almost like a decade. Just about. Because like, I remember gaming being like less aggressive in the kind of the 2000s. That stuff was just weird. Like you had the baby being born and growing into an old man as they fly through the sky. You had the other baby with the PS3 thing, just weird, generally weird stuff. But like back in the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show. It's a reference. You had constant things, even from Nintendo. Not only was Crash Bandicoot dunking on Nintendo of America and Sega, but you had Nintendo's Rumble Pack VHS tape, which had like Sega and PlayStation employees torturing a Mario doll to get the secrets of the Rumble Pack. And like that stuff has unfortunately, I think, played a big part in why gaming is so divisive and why people are so defensive towards their products. Also, the fact that these things are like stupid expensive, and you don't want to admit that the one you bought is worse than the one another person bought. But the whole, like, you don't see people. I mean, you kind of see it with like cars, and I guess people kind of compare everything. It's kind of human nature. But video games are just more aggressive. Like, Sony doesn't announce a new TV and have people in the replies saying, "Yo, the Samsung OLED TV is better." I actually use Sony TVs. I like Sony TVs. I've never been happy with the Samsung TVs I've used. But they were like lower end cheap Samsung TVs, so that's probably a bigger part of it than anything. Remember when this video was about Sonic? Yeah, I realized there's also a fast forward feature on here, so let's use this to clear the game faster. This is hell. This is like legitimately hellish, but it does create an interesting challenge. Like, this is probably not fun to watch. I'm gonna stop doing it. But, yeah, the reason console marketing was so aggressive for the longest time is because of Sega. And their whole Genesis does what Nintendo don't, and, like, HAG and all that other stuff. And it was very reflective of advertising just at the time. Advertising has changed a lot since then. But I do think it's a big reason why people are so divisive about games, and especially about consoles. It's because that was the first generation where we really had like competing consoles, like the Atari 5200 or whatever, 7800, all that stuff. That was not directly competing with the NES. They're really, looking at those systems, there wasn't a comparison. Nintendo did not have anything to fear. Sonic gave Nintendo something to fear, and I think that's the scariest thing of all. So yeah, that's going to probably do it for this episode. We're going to continue this because I want to try to get through the whole game. But yeah, that is the magic of Sonic 1 and how it kind of destroyed video game discussion forever by making it effectively a quest to see who is better. Yeah, that's about it.